This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into this latest edition of Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey alongside Brian Tripp. Thank you so much for joining us here for what is a great week number 9, not just in the conference, but all of college football. Trip here as we are starting to enter the month of November, which is crazy, Trip, by the way. The fact that we are sitting here the last week of October, where's the season gone so far?
You know, I was caught a little bit off guard by the open because you always, and I mean always, start by saying whether it's a good slate of games or not, and I appreciate the buildup, but a big week number, a big week, and he didn't do it today. It was just, this is just great. It's not big. How are you?
I am good. I'm good. Trying to keep you on your toes. You know, I can't lull you to sleep every single week, but the same boring intro, although big would be fitting here for this week. That's for sure.
Yeah, there are 5 ranked versus ranked matchups in college football. One of them in the Big Ten, 20th ranked to Illinois, at top ranked to Oregon. A game, you know, you look at the spread, people are saying, it's not going to be all that close. It's in odds in 3:30 on CBS. But also games, Notre Dame at Navy, Missouri ranked 21st at 15th ranked Alabama. Missouri 6-1, Alabama 5-2. Could the Tide be knocked out this week? Texas ranked 5th now, 6-1 at 25th ranked Vanderbilt 5-2. Can the Commodores do it again? And 8th ranked LSU at 14th ranked Texas A&M. Both teams are 6-1, which means one of those teams is getting their second loss overall as it impacts the college football playoff. But it also means one of those two teams will be knocked from the ranks of the unbeatens in the SEC. And out of all those teams in the SEC, who are the only two remaining unbeatens in the SEC? It's LSU and Texas A&M. Texas A&M ranked 14th despite their only loss this season occurring in week number 1 to 12th ranked Notre Dame. And Notre Dame ranked 12th, Navy 24th there in that first game. I didn't mention their ranking. So yeah, it's a great slate. And again, games that will impact the college football playoff and probably some games that are flying under the radar that will impact the college football playoff world as well.
Absolutely. And if you're a Big Ten fan, right? Or if you're a Indiana fan with dreams right of the playoff, these are some big time consequential games for your, ability to get in or not. Like you said, like Notre Dame Navy is essentially an elimination game for the loser. Navy's had a tremendous year this year, but their schedule is crap. So they need desperately here, if they truly want to not only get the group of 5 bid, but maybe sneak in as an at-large team, you have to beat Notre Dame. And if Notre Dame loses, right, they're toasted with 2 losses. Like you said before, Missouri, Alabama, with how Mizzou played, even if they have a second loss, it's tough to see them getting in the playoff with how they've skated by.
And without their quarterback this week.
Yes, and their running back. Mizzou's running back and starting quarterback Brady Cook, that's from a movie last week. Getting hurt in the first quarter, going to the hospital, coming back, leading a fourth quarter comeback over Auburn. Great story, great win for Mizzou, but that season's been a big time disappointment.
Let me put this in perspective. You think, okay, 5 ranked versus ranked matchups. There are only 25 ranked teams. So 10 of the 25 ranked teams are playing a ranked opponent this week. That's significant. And I'm not great with math, so I can't give you a percentage real quick, although I should be able to off the top of my head. But let's see, that would be 25, 50, 40%. 40% are playing ranked opponents this week. That's significant. That's a big deal. That's pretty unprecedented in college football. Like this isn't Texas, Georgia like you had last week. There's no Ohio State, Oregon on the schedule, but this is a really good slate of games.
I mean, got 6 weeks left. Like this is like, we're in the final home stretch here. This is for some teams, their last big opportunity to get a resume building win. I mean, for Vandy, like I don't think they're going to beat Texas, but let's just say they do. You have 2 top 5 victories on your resume. Like all of a sudden we have to start talking about Vandy in the College World Playoff race here. So there are some big time consequential games outside of the Big Ten that could shape how many teams in this conference get in. And this weekend could go a long way, 2 months from now, from determining if the Big Ten has 4 teams in, 3 teams in, hell, 2 teams in. It's a big one here, not just again in the conference, but like you said, with all these ranked on ranked matchups, you're going to see a lot of movement both up and down across college football.
And then in the conference, you have Washington at 13th ranked Indiana. Indiana without its starting quarterback, Kurtis Rourke, this week. They're less than a touchdown favorite. Penn State, ranked 3rd in the country, has to go on the road to play a team in Wisconsin that's won 3 in a row. And Penn State isn't even a full touchdown favorite on the road at Wisconsin. So you obviously have the ranked versus ranked matchup of Illinois visiting Oregon. Oregon 21.5-point favorites at home, but also those intriguing matchups in the Big Ten, and a matchup that a lot of people thought could be, we're talking about Indiana now, but a month ago, everyone thought, well, will Nebraska be undefeated going to Columbus to take on Ohio State? And you have that on Big Noon as well. So you have game day and Big Noon in the Big Ten. So also some big games in conference, and then a rivalry game in Michigan State and Michigan as well.
You're right. It's a lot of fun. Let's start with that Nebraska-Ohio State game, Trip, because like you said, preseason, we thought, this could be a top 15, top 10 matchup here. Yep. If Nebraska can take care of business. Obviously, they did not. But what's fascinating about this matchup is now going into this game, you look at Ohio State's offensive line, right? The biggest question for their team going to the season. Well, we saw it happen in the game against Oregon 2 weeks ago, but now this week, Ryan Day finally made it official. Their left tackle, Josh Simmons, who's been, a stalwart there for the Buckeyes, is not allowed a sack all season long, projected to be a first-round pick. So he's a lot of talent. He's now out for the season, unfortunately. So now you look at what was already a questionable unit for the Buckeyes now becoming decimated. That depth is not exactly pristine. And you have a Nebraska team, Trip. I don't know how you feel about their defense after what we saw last week, but if you take that out for a second, that defense has been one of the toughest, one of the best, especially in terms of stopping the run in the country. This is not an easy matchup whatsoever for the Buckeyes here, as they have a tough defensive line against now a beleaguered offensive line going into the hardest part of their schedule.
And the question for Ohio State was, obviously, I think they knew Simmons was going to be out. Now we officially know Simmons is going to be out. But what does that offensive line look like moving forward? And how are they going to start with it? Seth McLaughlin, who transferred into play center, has been a real stabilizing force and a great veteran presence for them on the offensive line. He's been a big everyone wants to talk about, obviously, the flashy additions that you make at quarterback and wide receiver, at safety, at running back for Ohio State. And I get some are transfers, some are freshmen in that group. But what he's done at center has really helped anchor that offensive line. Now, Zen Mikulski came into the game at Oregon, and he was the lowest ranked player on Ohio State's offense with a 47.6 PFF grade. But Ohio State only allowed 1 sack, and I know Birch was out for Oregon. But overall, the line played pretty well in that game, even with Simmons going out and another injury in that game. And for now, because of what he did in camp, and he's 6'6", 320, a fourth-year guy in the program, a former 4-star recruit, he's going to get the first crack at it, just stepping into that tackle position, and he'll make his first career start against the Huskers. Ohio State does have the option of mixing and matching and maybe taking one of the guards and moving the guard out to tackle. Then you bring in a backup guard where you feel like you have a little bit more depth. But they're going to start with Mikulski. And you made a good point. Do I think Nebraska has a chance in this football game? Absolutely not. But they have a good defensive front. And Ohio State needs to evaluate where they're at. And is this the puzzle? Are these the right puzzle pieces to have? And you have 1 week to figure it out before you go to Happy Valley and play a team with Zane Durant in the middle and Abdul Carter and Denai Dennis Sutton on the ends in their big game. They lost to Oregon, so that puts the stakes are even higher for Ohio State when they head to Happy Valley. For that big game, they have, coming off their bye, they knew Simmons was going to be out. It's not a surprise. Coming off their bye, they had a bye week. Nebraska, they had 2.5 weeks then to get ready for what they'll face in Happy Valley.
And that's why if you're a Penn State fan, Indiana fan, even an Oregon fan, if you're anticipating a rematch in the Big Ten title game, this is a must-watch game for you because this is the first test to see how susceptible Ohio State is. I'm with you. We'll get to our picks later on. And Tyson Alger of the I-5 Quarter will also join us as well, who covers Oregon. We'll get some perspective on the Ducks here. But in this game specifically, Nebraska is a 25.5-point dog. I don't think they have a chance to win this game. But that doesn't mean that there's no storylines you can watch. And that matchup of Ohio State's offensive line versus Nebraska's defensive line with Ty Robinson, Hutmaker, James Williams, like you have a lot of playmakers there for and really disruptors for Nebraska that if we're seeing consistent pressure on Will Howard, if we're seeing that run game dry up, and it was not exactly a great running game for the Buckeyes the last time they're out against Oregon, that I was disappointed with how they were struggling to run the ball. That's huge because now, again, if you are looking at the Penn State game and even the Indiana game or a rematch with Oregon, then you are now more one-dimensional than ever. It only makes Will Howard's job more difficult, and it makes Ohio State's margin for error a lot slimmer than you would think their roster suggests.
I worry about this in the pass game for Ohio State and protecting Will Howard. Now he has the escapability and he has the legs, but obviously you want your quarterback to be able to utilize the whole field with the receivers and the options that they have. I think this is where having an offensive coordinator like Chip Kelly will really help. He will be able to scheme to assist there. You can use your tight end to block. You have veteran running backs who are good in the pass protection. You don't want to require your backs to be in pass protection. But I'm intrigued in how this impacts their pass game. I think with the backs they have and still what they have in the size and physicality, I still think they'll be able to run the ball and the explosive ability in the run game. But I'm really curious how it impacts the pass game.
You're right. Next week, man, Penn State has some disruptors. They do, and it's going to be a really fun matchup to watch here. So this is going to be Ohio State's first crack in terms of seeing if they can figure out their true offensive line now moving forward, that big-time injury to Josh Simmons. Speaking of offense, Trip, let's go to Indiana. Right, we did talk about Kurtis Rourke's injury last week and that blow win over Nebraska. Now you're going to have Taven Jackson get his first start of the season here for the Hoosiers, taking on a Washington defense that, again, the last time we saw them, beleaguered and allowed 40 points inexplicably to Iowa. But this is, Trip, the number one pass defense in all of college football here. Are you concerned at all about an upset here for Indiana? Is this maybe a sneaky game that not enough people are talking about in terms of the Hoosiers going down?
Now, I thought your transition was going to be, speaking of injuries, Kurtis Rourke is out for Indiana. But I think you went with the second best option, Taven Jackson. So Taven Jackson.
That's why you're the pro in this pod. That was a lot better of a transition, I will say.
Rourke underwent surgery on his right thumb reportedly on Monday. They're optimistic. Remember when we talked on Monday, it's like indefinitely. What's that even mean? They're optimistic he could be back for Michigan State, which is really good. That means he's only going to miss 1 week. Jackson, you ask, is it a concern with the passing game against Washington's pass defense? Sure. But Indiana is a balanced, efficient offense. And I think this is where you rely, and look what Elston did last week on the ground. This is where you rely on your running game a little bit more. And I'm not concerned about Indiana's offense with Jackson. Jackson has to, because of a small sample size. And if you go back last year when he did start, he turned the ball over. He just has to play clean football. He doesn't have to win the game for Indiana. They're good enough to win the game, not only because of their offense, but they're really good defense. And we'll talk about this more when we do our picks. But I think there's pressure on him. I think there's pressure on Indiana coming off that huge win. Now the nation's starting to talk a little bit more buy-in. But Jackson just needs to be, and I hate the term, but he just needs to manage the game well. He really does. And they can rely on that run game. It's not just about the passing game for Indiana.
No, you're right. And even you can rely on their defense as well. Like, this has been a really well-rounded team to where they're not just one player dependent. You know, that I think that's a good thing here for you, the Hoosiers.
They're beating everyone by 40 points. Oh, if they win by 20, you know, it's still a great game against a really good Washington defense. And Washington hasn't traveled well this year.
No, you're right about that. The two East Coast trips they've made so far, or Midwest to Iowa, East Coast to Rutgers so far, have resulted in L's for the Huskies. You're definitely right about that. And that's now another, long flight here, early kickoff time. The atmosphere, Trip, I'm excited. You had a great atmosphere last week for Nebraska. College game day now is in town. That, if anything, too, I think I will say early in the week, I was a little concerned about a hangover just because, again, that was a game that was built up. You had the first sellout there. There was raucous atmosphere. You just completely blow Nebraska out of the water. I do think having now game day back there, or there, I should say, this week, I think brings more juice. And I think kind of staves off any sort of hangover you could have of last week's win.
I agree. I'd be more worried about that if you're going on the road and we're taking on like a Minnesota this week. That's where if you're going on the road to take on Washington, I'd be more worried about that. And really cool with College game day. And I think it's been tough to watch Lee Corso the last couple of years because of what he's meant to College game day and the sport. And obviously he has earned the right with what he's meant to the sport and that program to be on and still featured on College game day, and his headset selection, like his headgear selection, it's Hall of Fame worthy. It's Hall of Fame caliber stuff. And for him to have the opportunity to go back to Indiana this week is absolutely awesome. And I know people have mixed opinions about him still being on the show, and I get that. But he's an institution. That shows not where it is today without Lee Corso. And he's earned the right to still continue his legacy and be out. And Kirk Herbstreit's been unbelievable with him to help him through it. And obviously they've limited his screen time, and thankfully he's still healthy enough to be able to be there. But this is so cool for him to have an opportunity to go to Indiana where he coached and have the sunshine scooter out there for College game day.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. It's a homecoming, if you will. This is, I would agree.
What he's meant for the sport is unbelievable. It really is.
And there have been plenty of times where I'm sitting there going, maybe this is it. But this week, especially, this is one where you throw that out the window. So this is just cool.
It's hard. It's sad.
Moment. It is.
It is sad. It is. But, he's battled so many different things with his health, but he's persevered and he's there and he's earned that right. But for him to go back to Indiana this week and what he's meant to obviously college football on TV, the college game day program, what college game day has become through the years, and then what he's meant to the sport, unbelievable.
Absolutely. You're 100% right about that. Let's see if this transition's any better. We just talked about trap games and hangovers here. Penn State going on the road at Wisconsin. No, you do it then. You take it.
We talk about making trips across the Big Ten, and College game day makes its first trip to Bloomington, Indiana. Well, I'm making my first trip this weekend to Madison, Wisconsin. Well, I've been to Madison, but to Camp Randall for a night game, 7:30 on NBC. As Penn State sideline reporter, I'll have one of the best views in all of college football for one of the great traditions in college football, jump around. And when I walked by Lash, the Penn State practice facility, and when I walked by Huluba Hall, where they were practicing inside to further amplify the sound, you could hear jump around clean and clear from miles away outside. That's how loud they were playing it. But as I make this trip, I was considering, and as game day goes to Bloomington, and the atmosphere has been unbelievable in Bloomington, what are the toughest environments in the Big Ten? And does the environment play a factor? Like when we talk to people, some people are like, yeah, it decides the game. I think in college football, there's some sports where home field advantage really matters. There's some sports where it really doesn't. I think in college football, it really does. Like look at Oregon being 21.5-point favorites this week because they're at home. If that game's in Champaign, that line's different. Penn State only 6.5-point favorites in Madison. Well, yeah, Wisconsin's playing better, but a big reason that line is less than a touchdown or is about at a touchdown is because Penn State is on the road. So it made me consider, what are the toughest environments in the Big Ten and what impact does home field advantage really have in college football? How's that transition?
That was good. Damn it, that was good. You are a lot better than I. I'll leave the transitions to you now moving forward. You take them over. That was good.
Thank you.
Answer your second question first. I think home field advantage in college football matters more than any other sport, pro or college. I think it does have an impact here. I think when you're talking about 18 to 22-year-old kids in some hostile environments, you see teams play better and have some great home records in part because the crowd makes it tough for the opponent. We've seen, plenty of videos, whether it's Penn State, whether it's LSU, whether it's Oregon. Like there are some places, Iowa, where it's you go in there and you go, oh boy, we're already down. Or it almost already feels like you're down 7-0 just because it's so loud. Hostile fans are on top of you. It's hard to communicate. Like there's a real thing with home field, I would say more than anything in the pros for sure. And really anything in college, I guess college basketball would be the only other real comp here. I think college football matters a ton. Yeah,
let me add two factors to this that I think is unique more to college football than it is anything else. Number one, and probably the most important factor, is facilities. There are not standardized facilities and requirements across the Big Ten. So you go and, previously at Northwestern, right, until they tore the field down last year, at Ryan Field, you're in a locker room that maybe holds 30, 40 people, and you have 85 players there, 75 players dressing for a game. Where do they fit? Where do the coaches go? You're having your halftime meeting, some of the players on chairs outside the locker room where fans can lean over the railing and see what is going on. And meanwhile, you have the back of house staff pushing crates and trash cans by. Iowa has the small pink visitors locker room. Purdue's locker rooms. A lot of the visiting locker rooms are dumps. Like they shouldn't. There needs to be some standard requirements for medical, for press. Like they're dumps. It is a real factor, and that is part of the home field advantage in college football. You have to walk up a long tunnel. It's bad. It's bad. And the second part is more relevant now in 2024 and moving forward is the travel. Now to go, like, look at the records. They speak for themselves. To go across the country and travel 2-3 time zones. And yeah, these teams are chartering, but they're not chartering the same way a 53-man NFL team does when you're traveling, travel party of 200 plus people for a college football game. And you still have classes. And I know Rutgers left early this week to go to USC. Penn State left a day early to go to USC. It's the travel in the time zones. It's a real thing, and also is a big element in this home field advantage now.
Two things. One, about the travel. A lot of these places, unlike NFL teams, are remote. It's not easy to get to State College no matter where you're coming from. And there are plenty of places here tucked away in the Big Ten that it's just difficult to get to, where the airport's not that close. We've seen with Penn State, maybe the runway for some is not long enough. Like it is truly a factor here. The third thing I'll add, and this is relevant to this year moving forward, the helmet communication, right? In previous years, you had the signals on the sideline. So sure, the crowd noise can impact, the snap count, right? If the offensive line can hear you. But now if you're the quarterback and you're pressing on your ears, it's going to be even more difficult just to get the play call heard and then relay it to everybody else, because again, they're not doing signals now. So there's one person that hears the play call, right? And so he has to relay that to all 11 people. So the offensive linemen, they just can't look to the sideline, or the receivers just can't look to the sideline the way they used to. And to get the play, now you have to hear it from one guy who tells everybody else. It takes longer. And if you are in some of these hostile environments, it's more difficult to communicate.
And when it also is difficult to communicate, when you're at home and you're on defense. I think that's a thing that a lot of teams didn't account for and have had to adjust to start the season, that you as a defensive captain, whoever is your primary signal caller on defense and getting that helmet communication, it's really loud. Oh, we can't hear when we're on defense at home. How do we handle and adapt and adjust to it? And that's something a lot of people, a lot of teams, a lot of programs, I think it took them a week or two to realize, like, hey, we got a problem here. What is our method of communication? And teams have adjusted and adapted to what that is. Now, we talk about, loud. I'll tell you the toughest place that I've ever been, and this is, being perspective on the sideline. I haven't been to every venue, but it's Iowa, because the stands are so close to the field. Penn State actually tells its players when it goes to Iowa, they're not allowed to take their helmet off and set it, because if you set your helmet on the back of the bench, fans will reach over the stands, and they're so close they can reach onto the bench and take a helmet and pass it up the stands and take it away from the player. That Iowa's
wow.
Just because of how compact it's packed in, they're right on top of you. They enclose the one end zone. It is tough. It is loud. And I think you're splitting hairs then when you talk about loud, intimidating. I think Penn State's unbelievable. A whiteout and a night game in Happy Valley, and I've even been to some games there where it's not a night game. When you have 110,000 people cranked up and the way that stadium holds sound, there's nothing that compares to that. And I'm interested to see Autzen for the first time. I'm really intrigued, because everyone said, and I haven't been there, so I can't speak to it. Everyone said all Ohio State's fans, their ears were ringing after that game. But a lot of it depends on stadium construction and just how many people it holds. Because, Purdue a couple years ago, I was at an opening game there. It was a night game, blackout, Penn State, sold out crowd. And yeah, it gets loud, but when you're only at 60,000 people, how loud, is construction of the stadium. One end zone at the time was completely open. It's loud, but is it loud? You're splitting hairs.
Right. And like you said, with construction, Purdue, Michigan, you have the bowl feature that kind of goes out. Iowa, Autzen, Penn State, somewhat here, kind of goes vertically. That matters as well. I've not been to a ton of Big Ten venues. I've been to 5 total.
If you could pick one that's on, what's your bucket list one to get to?
Ooh, I would say right now, and maybe because it's the new shiny thing, Oregon. Oregon right now is for me. I've not been to Michigan. I've only been to, I'll say it this way, Penn State, Michigan State, Rutgers, Maryland, and Wisconsin.
Rutgers, sneaky good venue. Maryland, sneaky good venue because of the way the stadiums are constructed. And if you get a good crowd in there, Rutgers has done a really good job with its environment. And I think we both know, the person who's in charge of that there, and he's done a good job. But the Rutgers, without even knowing someone, having a connection there, sneaky good stadium, and there's nothing special about it, but really can be a difficult place to play. I'll tell you what my bucket list is. And Penn State has not been there with fans in a really long time. Nebraska. I think it looks, the sellout streak, obviously. And when they weren't good, you had boosters buying tickets to continue the sellout streak, but they're truly selling out games again. When I've been there for other sports, baseball, basketball, volleyball, what a fan base. What a fan base. And I would love to go to Memorial Stadium for a football game.
That's a good one. And that's like, you look around the Big Ten, I think this only highlights like it's tough to win on the road, whether it is travel, whether it is places like Oregon, Washington that are loud, Nebraska, Iowa, like winning a road game is impressive. And I think, in the SEC, they get a lot of credit for the environments and how tough it is to win in the conference. The Big Ten is just as tough. Like it is, like we're just going through this list here. We've mentioned probably half the teams at best, and I've left some off that had good environments or really good teams or just hard places. That team plays great at home. It is really, really tough to win in the Big Ten. But I'm excited for you. Wisconsin's a great town. Madison is amazing. Best
Big Ten town. Hands down. Madison, by far.
Of the 5 I've been to, I would agree. It blows it away. Blows it away. People are so...
Of the 16 I've been to. Yeah. It's fun. It's got a capital city vibe. It's got a college town vibe. You got the 2 lakes. It's October 26th, 25th when we're there. It's not going to be been there when it's 20. It's not as fun when it's 20.
I was looking at the weather. It's going to be like in the 30s. Better bundle up.
No, 50s at kickoff and maybe down to the upper 40s by the end of the game. Not bad.
Okay. Are you someone that runs cold?
Huh? I'm not a snake. Used to work for one.
There's plenty of people that just get cold easily. No? Are you going to be on the sideline next to the heater?
Did you hear what I said? Did you hear what I said?
You're not a snake?
Just pass over not a snake, but I used to work for one.
Oh, I did not hear that. Oh, that's good. You got jokes today. Oh, you're funny today. Must be the Thursday.
Hey, audience question. I think it's a good time to work it in. This comes from John, loyal listener. Appreciate it.
Thank you, John.
Also asked, am I going to get paid? This is the second week in a row I've asked a question. Is this the strongest the Big Ten has ever been in terms of top to bottom coaching talent?
Coaching talent? Ooh. I mean, off the top of my head, I have to say yes, right? I mean, you have teams ranked 2, 1, 3, 4 in the country, which is not.
So you have Dan Lanning, Ryan Day, James Franklin.
You have to feel good about let's say
Kurt
Cignetti. I like what Jonathan Smith so far has done for a program like Michigan State. Kirk Ferentz is right, an institution. Jed Fish, we'll see. Washington so far is hanging tough. BJ Fleck I'll say this for Minnesota. They've been better than I thought. I mean, they right now could be bowl eligible.
I think it's too hard to answer. When you look back and you can mention a lot of the historic names and Hayes and Schembechler and, even like when Lloyd Carr and Tressel and Urban Meyer and Paterno and like there are so many names. Schiano, Loxley right now. That's too hard of a question to answer without doing a real like deep comparative dive year to year. I think the talent is good. And I think you look at a lot of the programs. This is how I evaluate it. And again, didn't do any research to answer this question. It's a great question and maybe something we revisit in a couple of weeks. But how many schools would, and this is always what I go to when people talk about, we should fire so-and-so. Oh, we got to fire so-and-so. How many schools in the Big Ten right now would trade, like if you're going to move on from Ryan Day, which is for whatever reason a discussion, who are you getting that's any better? If you're going to move on from Lincoln Riley, if you're going to move on from James Franklin, if you're going to move on from PJ Fleck, who are you going to get that's any better? And that's how I evaluate coaching. If you're going to move on from Greg Schiano, Mike Loxley, who are you going to get? Who are you going to get?
It's a fair question, and it's a tough question. Like you said, because there's not now, like you look around, like how many coaches, especially in a year like this year where there is a lot of parity, where every time you think this is the team to beat, Alabama, Texas, Ohio State, they lose. I think it is tough to kind of look around and say, well, all right, we're going to fire this guy and, we're just going to bring in who? I think it is tough. You look at least the coaching is interesting.
The conference, the conference obviously changes the landscape, but if you go back last year, the conference was better with Jim Harbaugh in the conference.
Absolutely.
Whether, love him or hate him, the coaching last year, we have basically the same cast of characters with the exception of Cignetti, big addition.
And Dan Lanning.
But lose, but if you're just going with the 14 teams that you had a year ago, you got Matt Rule now. Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question.
Brett Bielema has, turned Illinois around this season to where they're a top 20 team. Like, I think the good news for the conference is I think you have two things. One, I think you still have plenty of coaches at the top tier, right, of college football that you could say 3, 4, 5 are right now that are part of the top 10 coaches in college football. They also have a lot of promise. Again, like I think someone like for Jonathan Smith, you have to feel really good about the state of the program and the direction under him now as he takes over and tries to build back up Michigan State. You not just have it's not top heavy. I think that's part of the reason why the question was asked. Like there is I'll say maybe 14 of the 18 schools roughly. There's a reason right now either your coach is the guy or you have a reason to believe he can keep on developing and getting better to be the guy within the next 2, 3, 4 years. There's a lot of there's a lot of hope, I think, going forward here for this conference, coaching wise. Yeah,
I think that's a great answer. I like that. We've talked a lot. We haven't really talked about the games this week. The premier game this week is Illinois at Oregon, number 20 Illinois at top-ranked Oregon. Tyson Alger from the I-5 corridor, who's covered the Ducks for a really long time for a bunch of different outlets. We had a chance to talk to him. Let's get to our interview with Tyson Alger to talk about some college football in what is a big week number 9. And you got the first ranked matchup. Obviously, a lot about that matchup, but also a lot more on the Ducks, who have ascended to number 1 in the AP poll this week.
And welcome back into Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. Really excited here to welcome in our next guest to talk about right now the number 1 team in all the country, a big ranked on ranked matchup this week here for Oregon as they do welcome number 20 Illinois to town. Let's go out west and welcome in Tyson Alger from the I-5 corridor. Tyson, thanks so much, man. I appreciate the time.
Hey, good morning, guys. Thanks for dropping in here in the Pacific time zone. I hope I represent us well.
Of course, we do appreciate the time here. So speaking of representing well, Oregon right now, through going into week number 9 at least, number 1 team in the country. There's obviously a lot of preseason expectations, right, for the Ducks. So it's not exactly like they're a shock that they're sitting here. But so far through 9 weeks of the season, Tyson, has this Ducks season gone as you've expected so far?
It's funny because if you would have asked me this before the season started, I would have said this was completely within the realm of possibility. I mean, they were the preseason number 3 team. You had a quarterback who a lot of people had in their front runner, their Heisman discussions. And frankly, I've been on the Oregon beat for 12 years now, and this is the deepest and most talented team that they have. So all that being said, yeah, I wouldn't have been shocked by the number one, but I also saw this team play the first 2 weeks of the season where they beat an FCS team by 10 points and where they just got by Boise State. And while in retrospect, that Boise State game doesn't look as bad, maybe now, that Genty guy is real. I don't know if you guys have seen him out there on the East Coast, but my goodness. Yeah, so like considering like the kind of the stumble out of the blocks to where Oregon's at now, where they beat Ohio State, they went to Purdue and shut them out 35-0. I'm surprised by the rebound per se. I'm not shocked that Oregon, with its talent level and in the weird college football season we're having, that they've reached this point. But they took a scenic route to get here, because this isn't starting out with 17 combined point win over 2 Idaho teams in your first 2 weeks of the season isn't necessarily the recipe to like go be number one in a few more weeks. But hey, that's where we're at.
I have a follow-up on that, but first, when you watch, and we have to because he's a Heisman favorite right now, but when you watch Genty in person, I know it was early, did you notice the way he because that's the viral thing right now, is how he stands in the backfield. What were your impressions of him? And did that stand out to you, the way he just stands like straight up in the backfield?
Yeah, like he's just this kind of looming figure back there. Like you very much know that like he's on the field. And I mean, shoot, what this guy's averaging like 9 yards per carry, 10 yards per carry. And usually in these types of games where you have a power 4 team playing up against like a Mountain West team, like you can see just physical differences on the field. And while you're able to see that a little bit on Boise's like offensive line, dude, that kid is just something different. And Oregon's got 5-star linebackers, they got 5-star edge guys, and it didn't matter against Genty. He was fun.
To follow up on your previous response, Oregon, as you talk about that start, should we anticipate that more in the current day and age of college football because of all the portal guys? Like, the expectation is you just plug and play. These are all big time players. They're getting all the best transfers in college football, but that might be a bad assumption to make. What do you attribute that start to?
Yeah, I think it's that, coming into the season, like I wanted to still live in a world where team chemistry matters. You know what I mean? Like you still thought that like a team that, Oregon returned a lot of like key skill guys on this year's team, but you're replacing like an All-American center, you're replacing an All-American quarterback, you're replacing a lot of guys on the defensive line. Yeah, like it just took some time to gel, and Oregon's a team that, last year's offense was one of the best in the country, but it was also run at an incredibly efficient rate. Bo Nix completed like 78% of his passes. And I know kind of the national narrative was like, it was a lot of check down and a lot of kind of paper cut type of stuff. But, I think replacing that with anybody is going to be a challenge. And they just happen to get lucky that they got the one guy who can complete it at a higher rate than Bo Nix last year. Like, Dylan's been insane in his ability to be efficient this season. I mean, like I think in all but like 2 games, he's completing above 80% of his passes. He puts the guy right on dudes and gets rid of the ball so quickly. And so, I think it's unfair in this era to just assume that like it's going to be plug and play. Like the big narrative out here was like you're replacing one 15,000-yard passer with another 15,000-yard passer, but I think as we saw, especially along the offensive line, like some of these things take time to gel. I think we're learning that Jackson Powers Johnson was a very good center for the Ducks last year. Turns out when you win the Remington Award, it's for a reason. And so, that combined with, Matthew Bedford has barely played for them this year, and he was expected to be a big focal point of guard play for them. And so, yeah, I just think it took a little bit of feeling out with an offense that really likes to complete a lot of combos before it takes like the big punch, if you will.
This may be a stupid question here, Tyson, because right now the Ducks going into November are the number 1 team in the country. But we've seen that kind of really doom teams this year where Georgia, right, has lost as number 1. Alabama has lost as number 1. Texas most recently has gone down at number 1. It's been a parity-filled college football season. As we head into week number 9 here and really start to kind of enter the final third of the season, would you say right now with what you've seen from the Ducks, would you say they're the best team in college football?
Man, that's so hard without watching it from like a national reporter's lens. Like, I try to
Yeah.
watch as much football as I can on Saturdays, but I just don't, I don't have the time to invest in a lot of people's tape. I think they've earned that number one resume. Ohio State's a pretty good team, guys, and that was one of the better football games I've ever seen covered in person. And I'm sure the Buckeyes, if you got them in Columbus or on neutral turf, it would probably be a challenging rematch. But you won that game. You won the games that are in front of you, and they've gotten better each week too. And I think that's always kind of a nice sign with number one team is are they trending upwards? And even after the 35-0 win over Purdue, even after the Ohio State win, like you could see a lot of aspects of where Oregon could improve and still get better. And so like I still think they have a lot of ceiling to grow into. And then you kind of take a look at like the rest of their schedule too. I know this Illinois game kind of snuck up and became a pretty competitive one compared to what we were expecting at the start of the year. But that Michigan game's not looking nearly as daunting as it did at the start of the year. Washington's really struggling. The Ducks have a really good chance of continuing this longer than the last time they were number one, when they reached number one back in 2012, and they immediately lost to Stanford in what is probably one of the more therapy-inducing games in Oregon history.
You mentioned that this, obviously the schedule sets up well for them, and it looks like they have a chance to take this and run with it for a little while. If there was one area though for the Ducks right now, you feel that they're vulnerable in, or you still want to see, or fans still want to see grow, right? What is that area for Oregon?
It's interesting. I think they'd like to see a little bit more disruption in the secondary. I mean, that was a position that they completely retooled in the offseason, and they've played pretty well this year. I mean, and the whole group is coming off of a shutout. Mm-hmm. But if you're looking at the defense as a whole, that front seven has played incredible this year. The amount of pressure that they've been able to produce, the fact that you can lose a Jordan Birch and it not really matter. I mean, Mateo Uiagalelei, I nailed that name, by the way. He's up to like 5.5. He's up to like 5.5 sacks, and I don't think the kid's even 19 years old yet. Like he's just a physical freak up front. So I think just kind of meshing the front and the back end is, and I don't even think that's a weakness. It's just kind of like picking nits with this group right now. And then the other thing too is just, I like Gabriel's very good. The running game's very good. Mm-hmm. Oregon has a lot of talent at receiver. That was one of the largest talking points coming into this year. So this might be like the most talented Oregon receiving class ever. We saw them spread pretty thin last week, and part of that was because of Trayshawn Holden's suspension for the spitting incident. But they've kind of tallied a few injuries in that area. Kyler Casper, who's would be an excellent red zone threat for them, has been injured for most of the year. Same with Gary Bryant Jr., who came over from UC a couple years ago. So if they have a weakness anywhere, it might just be like they could get thin at receiver if they go through a little bit more turbulence here. But I would also not expect anybody to spit on somebody on national television moving forward. But, I didn't expect it the first time. So
I said that, it's one thing to host Ohio State in a huge game at Autzen, and then to play a Penn State or a Michigan, USC, they're used to playing because of the conference in Washington. But the true indoctrination into the Big Ten for Oregon is going to Purdue on a Friday night. Like to go to
right, yeah. Well, I made the case that Oregon's performance last weekend was probably better than it was the week before, because there's no way that you can go into that Purdue game and have people talk about the Purdue game on that Saturday where you have Texas, Georgia, or like those games. The only way people are talking about that Georgia game is that Georgia game Purdue game goes wrong. And they cleaned it up Friday night. It was 35-0. They had their backups in by the fourth quarter. Like that's as well as you can take care of business on a short week coming off of that Ohio State game.
You're right about that. Quick question about Jordan Birch. Is there any sort of health update? Is he expected back at any point this season?
They haven't ruled him out for the year. Lanning is not one to offer up extra injury tidbits if he doesn't have to. But from what I understand, it's not going to be anytime soon he comes back. Like I do think they are preparing to have him later in the year, but I don't think it would probably be until later in November, if not December in the playoffs.
Wow. Yeah, it's obviously a brutal loss for them, but hopefully, fingers crossed, he can come back healthy. And that'd be a huge addition for that Oregon defense for sure. We were talking, Tyson, before he came on here, because Tripp is going, right? Penn State's going at Wisconsin. So this is his first time in Madison. Really great environment, tough environment there for a night game. And for Big Ten fans, maybe were unaware, didn't get to truly see it until Ohio State came to town a few weeks ago. The Autzen environment. For those maybe unaware, could you explain just how tough of a place it is to play, to go to Autzen and try to win if you're an opponent?
Yeah, it's really sneaky because if you start looking at like the attendance numbers or stadium capacity, I think there's a lot of deduction that like, oh, Autzen might not be that loud because it sits like 54,000 people and can standing room only out to about 60, and that is one of the smaller footprints in the new Big Ten. But I think Ohio State fans were pretty shocked by what happened here a couple weeks ago. I mean, I'm sure you guys saw some of the viral pictures that were going around, but there was a lot of like, OMG, biggest state or loudest stadium ever. And I don't know if Autzen necessarily reaches like the highest decibel in the country, but it's the consistency of it. And it's this echoing that gets produced too. Like the stadium is like this wedge cut out of the ground, and it's got a massive wooden overhang over the south grandstand, and cheering just kind of like reverberates around there, and it kind of creates kind of like this bassy rhythm, and it's unique to college football. Like I don't quite understand the physics of why that works like that, but the level it reached in Ohio State was something that I hadn't heard in that stadium before, and I don't know if you'll be able to replicate that against like an Illinois or when Maryland comes to town here in a couple more weeks, but it was. I think a lot of people realize that we do care about our college football out here.
Tyson, one more from me, and it's about the matchup with Illinois. Look, they're 3 touchdown favorites at home. Obviously, Illinois does some things well, but Ryan and I have talked about we don't feel like they're explosive enough offensively to keep up with what Oregon can do. You don't look at a game and say, oh, Oregon's going to score less than 30 points. And like when I try to evaluate games, like, okay, what's the max points I could see Illinois getting to? What's the minimum points I could see someone holding Oregon to this season? That said, there are some interesting matchups throughout the course of this. Illinois certainly has a good run defense. Akis just had a really good game for them last week. James trying to get back on track, right, for Oregon, even though he didn't play a ton last week. What are some of the things you look at in this game, even though Oregon's really a heavy favorite, despite playing a ranked team at home?
Yeah, I think it's getting that running game kind of back into a groove. Jordan James has been excellent for most of this year. I know they kind of had, I don't want to say hiccups in a 35-0 win, but it just wasn't maybe as smooth as they were hoping for last week, especially with like Noah Whittington too. He's a back who missed all of last season with the injury and is coming back, and was very electric 2 years ago before he got hurt. And so I think that's one of those guys that they're just kind of looking to see what he has still in the tank here. Illinois takes care of the football pretty well, considering how kind of not great of an offensive line they have. I think I saw they're rolling with like a 16-1 touchdown to an interception ratio. And I know the quarterback can kind of get out on the edge and get out there, but Oregon's got such good athletes along the edge, whether it's, Uiagalelei, like I was talking about, whether it's Justin Jacobs or Austin Jackson, who is like just one of the fastest. Sorry, I might have screwed that name up, but they just have, 4.4 to 4.8 speed between their, front seven and linebackers. That I just think it's tough for a team that's not up there talent wise to come in a road environment, especially like when you're probably playing conservative possessions to come in and win that game.
Lastly here, Tyson, to wrap up, we had a listener question earlier in the show about Big Ten coaches. And the question was, is this the best crop of Big Ten coaches the conference has ever had? And obviously there's been some legendary coaches in the conference, but now you're seeing newcomers. You're seeing, we're right now seeing Lincoln Riley in the middle of this, really struggling to adjust to the new Big Ten. Dan Lanning so far in his time at Oregon has only gotten the Ducks better, to where now you're really talking about this team legitimately competing for and winning a national title this season. What is it like covering Dan Lanning as a coach? Like, what makes him tick? What makes him special? What has made him right now quickly rising as one of the best college football coaches?
He's incredibly prepared. I know maybe he got a bad rap like his first 2 years in his career because there was a lot of like fourth downs or timeouts or kind of like in-game nitpicking that people kind of dove into. But this is a coach who has thought through a lot of situations. I think you saw that at the end of the Ohio State game too, with the whole 12 guys on the field thing. He's very confident in his ways. He's very set in his ways. I don't get the vibe out of him that this is his first head coaching job. I don't see any difference in the way that he carries himself in terms of like experience or inexperience in the job than like a Mario Cristobal before him, or, that year that we had Willie Taggart. Like he's somebody who's really endeared himself to this fan base. He's not the most chatty guy in the world, especially with like local media. Like he's pretty reserved, and he doesn't have a lot of time to waste on what he might perceive as fluff. But yeah, he's just a smart, determined guy who I think saw an opportunity in Oregon with what this program could be. Obviously there's a lot of auxiliary support here between the Nike and the NIL and all that sort of thing. And I think he kind of saw the landscape of college football and was like, I can build in Eugene, and it doesn't have to be, somewhere else. And so, yeah, people here, as long as he doesn't lose to Washington this season, I think they might start like getting the statue plans ready, because it's, when Mario Cristobal left, that was the third Oregon coach transition within like a 4 or 5 year period. The Ducks had finally gotten back to being competitive, and it's another coach who leaves them for Florida. It was pretty down around here after that. There was a big rallying amongst the alumni group to hire somebody that had ties to the school. There was a lot of people who wanted Justin Wilcox because he went here and he was alumni, and he wouldn't, ditch Oregon. And there was a lot of concern when you brought in this guy from like North Kansas City who coached at Alabama and it has no roots here. And 3 years later, it looks like, unless something crazy happens, he's going to be here for quite some time.
Great stuff with Tyson. Learned a lot more about the Ducks. We'll get to Illinois and Oregon in our picks here in just a moment, but let's go in order. Friday night, 11 o'clock on Fox. 11 o'clock. Need to stay up late for this one. Eastern time, folks. Rutgers 4-3, 1-3 in the league at USC. USC 2 touchdown favorites. 3-4, 1-4 in the Big Ten. The Friday night affair on Fox. Who do you have?
I'm going to take USC. Now, the 13.5 is a big number here for two reasons. Number one, I don't trust USC's defense, even though Rutgers' offense has struggled of late. I just, right now, they just seem to be in a slump. But also, number two, with how USC is playing the fourth quarter, even if they have a 14, 21-point lead, I can't trust them to hold it. So I think USC does win at home. I think the Rutgers keeps it within 2 touchdowns. The big thing to watch, though, is for USC. I mean, can you close out the fourth quarter? That's obviously been a huge problem for Lincoln Riley, not just this year, but as a tenure. In his 12 losses trip as USC's head coach, 5 of them have come when he's had a 2-touchdown lead. That's incredibly bad. So, look, you're not going to hang it on a mantle here if you beat Rutgers and hold on and play well in the fourth quarter. I think they win within 2 touchdowns, but you have to just play better in the fourth quarter, better than really any quarter you have since LSU fourth quarter week 1.
This isn't a question of talent. This is a question of how much they care. If USC cares, this game won't be close. Rutgers has injuries on defense, just allowed nearly 500 yards and 35 points at home against UCLA. Kyle Monangai is not 100% right now offensively as well. Short week, traveling across the country, went on Wednesday, late game, Eastern time, body clocks. Like, this should be a USC blowout. I like USC. I think they blow them out. I think USC gets back on track this week.
Speaking of blowouts, Ohio State, big noon kickoff on Saturday, 25.5-point favorites over Nebraska. We saw Nebraska's defense just get run all over last week at Indiana. Does that happen now for a second week in a road trip?
I think so. I think Ohio State's ability with their 2 backs, even with Simmons out, I still think they'll be able to run the football. And then Dylan Raiola, in 2 games this month, only has a 58% completion percentage for 368 yards. They're not going to be able to keep up with the Buckeyes. They're just not going to be able to keep up. Ohio State's way too explosive. Buckeyes also coming off a bye and coming off their first loss of the season. They're at home. If this is in Lincoln, maybe sneaky close early, but at home, Ohio State's gotten off to some fast starts in that building through the years. this is a Buckeye blowout?
I think Ohio State wins and covers, but if it's possible to have a 26-point close cover, I think we get that. Like, I do think Nebraska's defensive line is going to make it tough here for Ohio State to run the ball, especially early. We saw the Buckeyes get off to a slow start against Iowa a few weeks ago, only 7 points in the first half. Ohio State, I thought they could have ran the ball better against Oregon than they did. Now with, again, injuries to the O-line, a good defensive line in Nebraska, I think they had, just from a pride perspective, bounce back here and have a much more spirited effort after what happened to them last week. And you mentioned Raiola. I mean, he's hit a freshman wall big time here. Just 1 touchdown, 4 picks the last 3 Big Ten games. Nebraska in those 3 games, 16 points per game. So I think Ohio State wins, and again, wins by more than 25.5. But I don't like 31-3 where you kind of pull away late where it's, you cover and you dominate. But I don't think it's going to be as convincing as maybe the score looks.
Think they look ahead at all to Happy Valley?
I think after last week, yes. Like, I think Nebraska, if you're Ohio State, you go, this is an interesting game. I think coming off of how they just got obliterated by Indiana, I think it's only natural to be like, okay, like, we got this game right home. Like, let's already start looking ahead for a game now, especially when you have 1 loss. It's much more important. Like, if they were undefeated, I think they're more focused on Nebraska just because that 1 loss to Penn State, it's not going to change the trajectory of the season. Now you lose to Penn State and have 2 losses. Still think you make the playoff, but now again, you're talking about a road playoff game, and your road to the championship, which is the goal this year, gets only more difficult. I think because that lost to Oregon, it leads them to looking ahead more against Nebraska. How do you think about that? What are your thoughts?
I think it adds an element to why it could be close early, to your point, that they start peeking ahead, but I just don't see it being close. They're too explosive. Nebraska's not holding Ohio State under 30 points in the game. I don't think anyone's holding Ohio State under 30 points all season. And if they score 30 points, I don't see Nebraska putting up more than 15. So I don't see any way of it being close. What though surprising, as we go to our next game, Indiana has blown everyone out this year. They're one of 2 teams in the country. They haven't trailed all season. They're only 6.5-point favorites at home against 4-3 Washington, 2-2 in the league. Does Indiana stay unbeaten, and do they do it in convincing fashion again? Noon on BTN.
I think they stay undefeated, go to 8-0. I wouldn't say though convincing fashion. I'm just not sold right now. Taven Jackson, we talked about it earlier in the pod, can secure the ball enough to where Indiana can run away with this and hide. Again, Washington's pass defense is elite. They are really, really damn good. So I think they will give Indiana problems offensively, but I think Indiana is too well-rounded, too talented to lose this game. I think they do win, but more maybe 24-20. I think a little bit of a closer game here. I know that was the exact score prediction I gave last week against Nebraska, and that was anything but true. But I'm going to go back to the well here. I think it is a closer game where Indiana wins, but I think Washington makes you sweat here if you're an Indiana fan.
Will Rogers has to protect the football for Washington. 3 interceptions his last 2 games after none in his first 5. He's got pretty good receivers too. Giles Jackson, smaller guy, 47 catches, 542 yards. And Denzel Boston, 6'4", 40 catches, 9 touchdowns. The difference here, Indiana's defensive line, we talk so much about their offense. Their defensive line will dominate the offensive line from Washington. I think they get pressure on Rodgers. I think they create some turnovers. I could see a reason why this may be a little bit closer early, but Washington's 0-3. Their 3 losses have all come away from Husky Stadium this year. They lost at Lumen Field in the Apple Cup, lost at Rutgers, and as you said, they did not play well when they got beat at Iowa 40-16. I like Indiana. I like Indiana to cover. Maybe because of Jackson, maybe instead of a 30-point win, it's like 20. But I like Indiana. I don't think they're tested this week again. And with all the hype and game day there, if this is on the road, different story. But this being a home game for Indiana, I just think they keep rolling right down the tracks.
We talked about this game with Tyson, number 20 Illinois at number 1 Oregon, 3:30 Eastern on CBS, 12:30 local kick. Oregon trip, first time they are number 1 in the country since 2012. Do they stay that way after Saturday?
Yeah, I think Oregon's defensive front is going to be a problem, even, with Birch. I think it's going to be a problem for Illinois. They have 10 tackles for loss, 3 sacks against Purdue. It's a defense that, and we want to talk about the explosive plays offensively. a defense that's one of the top 20 defenses in the country against an Illinois team that Illinois has shown that they can score against middle tier opponents this year. Same thing I just said, you don't see Illinois putting up 30, 40 points to go step for step, blow for blow with Oregon. Oregon's gotten better every week. Gabriel, 77% complete. Like, he's playing at a high level. I just think Oregon's defensive front against Illinois' offensive line, which is a weakness for the Illini, I think that's the deciding factor in the game, and Oregon wins this easily.
I'm with you. Oregon's a bad matchup for almost every team in college football, how good they are, but especially Illinois, where they have a tremendous blend of toughness and speed. Illinois is a really gritty team, right?
Yes.
We've seen
good team. They're a good team.
Yes, very good team. The problem is not only can Oregon match that and surpass that, they also have the speed that Illinois just can't keep up with. I don't know how they're going to try to defend Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart on the outside. We saw the last time those two guys were given a one-on-one coverage, they toasted Ohio State all down the field. I just don't know how they keep them in front of them. I don't know how they out-tough them. I'm with you. I think Oregon wins in a blowout fashion. They cover the 3-touchdown spread for sure. They stay number 1 in the country in the only ranked-unranked matchup in the Big Ten this weekend.
And I think one thing to note, though, one other matchup to watch in this game, Gabe Akis for Illinois, coming off Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week honors, 13 tackles, 2.5 sacks against Michigan. A lot of that came in the fourth quarter of that game. But Oregon's ability to get back to the running game. Jordy James only played a half against Purdue, had 50 yards, a couple of touchdowns, but Oregon over the first 3 quarters only ran the ball for about 3 yards per carry against the Boilermakers. Can they get their running game back against Illinois and an Illinois defense that is a really good defense at all 3 levels?
And we saw last week against Michigan force big turnovers. Now, that was a big reason why they were able to win that game, is they got some key turnovers late. How about Northwestern, Trip? 3-4 this season, going on the road to Iowa, 2 touchdown favorites. This game's at 3:30 Eastern on Big Ten Network. You go back to last week, this is a rarity for the Hawkeyes defense. They did not force 1 punt against Michigan State in their loss here. Is this a bounce back effort here from the Hawkeyes defense, or are they still going to have some trouble here against Jack Lausch and the Wildcats?
Yeah, I think if this is, again, in Evanston, maybe a little bit different story. Iowa's really good at home. They are really good at home. I think they get the run game going. Northwestern gave Wisconsin a little bit of trouble last week, but again, that was in Evanston. I see this as a big bounce back for Iowa.
One quick note here I want to pass by. Matthew Shelton of Wildcat Report just put this out there. Jack Lausch, when he plays schools that start with a W, Washington, Wisconsin, only completing 33% of his passes for 135 yards, 0 touchdowns, 2 picks. When he plays teams in the Big Ten that don't start with a W, IU, Maryland, he's completed 60% of his passes for 446 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. Does that change your thoughts right now? Could we get a Jack Lausch breakout game upset in Iowa City?
No W for Jack Lausch in Iowa City.
I would agree. Give me Iowa minus 14. I do agree. Maryland at Minnesota here. Maryland, this is a big bounce back or a big spot here for them. They're 4-point dogs on the road in Minnesota. How do they handle success here, Trip, after that big win over USC last week?
I'm going to bring it up again, and it's something we talked about earlier in the pod. And when we put the plan for the pod together, we didn't know that this was how our picks were going to go. We did a whole segment on home field advantage. And I'm not saying Minnesota at 3:30, like their crowds have been really good this year. It's a tough place to play. I'm not saying because of home field, they're going to win the game. But once again, Maryland now hey, we just had a big win. We're going on the road. I think they're dangerous. I think the problem here is Minnesota doesn't blow anybody out. So Maryland with their playmakers, this reminds me a lot of the game against Michigan State, where you kind of hang around. Can you make enough plays at the end to find a way to pull it out? Minnesota's been really good at closing games. They've been a good fourth quarter team. I like Minnesota close, but I like Minnesota to win this game, especially because they're at home.
I like Minnesota too, because I think they match up well with Maryland. Obviously, Maryland, right? We know they want to rip it up through the air. Billy Edwards Jr., big game. Ty Felton, big game last week against USC. Well, the Gophers are the 4th best pass defense in all of college football. You have Coy Parrish, 4 interceptions, forced fumbles so far this season. He's been just an absolute disruptor in the secondary. So I think if you're Minnesota here, you match up well with what Maryland does offensively. I think they win. I think they do cover at home. All right, 2 games left to go here, Trip. A big one you will be at, making your debut trip to Madison. Number 3, Penn State, 6.5-point favorites on the road at Wisconsin. 7:30 Eastern kick on NBC. Upset spot here for Penn State?
Penn State, the key here, coming off a bye, have had some slow starts this season. I know James Franklin tried to dispel that notion throughout the course of the week, but coming off a bye, knowing Ohio State is on the horizon against a Wisconsin team playing its best football of the year, the key here is for Penn State to get off to a good start. Don't give Wisconsin belief. Don't let those fans ramp up even more than they're going to be. They're going to be finely tuned and well hydrated at kickoff. Anytime you go to Madison, Wisconsin, you get that spotted cow there that's not available outside of the state. Nuclear Brewing Company, shout out. Maybe they could be a sponsor on the podcast. But Penn State, they are the better team. If you go, and I've been prepping for the game, if you go position by position, there's not one position that you look at on the depth chart and go, I think Wisconsin's stronger there. You don't. Penn State's the better team. That doesn't mean Wisconsin's a bad team. They just don't have the upper echelon talent that Penn State has. They're playing their best football, but Penn State needs to start fast in this game.
Absolutely. And just be consistent. Penn State, to James Franklin's credit here, has done a great job of beating teams you're supposed to be. 26 straight victories they have over unranked opponents. On top of starting fast, one thing I'm watching in this game, Penn State receivers. They really showed out here, made some big-time contributions in that second half and fourth quarter against USC in that big comeback victory when they could not run the ball whatsoever. This game next week against Ohio State, look, obviously you need more balance in the run game, and I do expect Penn State's run game to get back into gear after struggling against the Trojans 2 weeks ago. But also you need your receivers to make more plays outside of Tyler Warren. Julian Fleming, after a few early drops, did a really good job at making some big-time fourth down catches. You have Harrison Wallace, Amari Evans on the outside that are explosive, that can make some big-time plays here. I think Penn State's receivers here will make some big-time plays in this game. I think they win. I think they do cover here, but I think Wisconsin pushes them for like 3 quarters. I think Penn State pulls away in the 4th, but I think we get a close game here. But in the end, Penn State, I think, does win, cover the touchdown spread.
2 follow-ups on that really quickly. I think Penn State's wide receivers ultimately are the key between Penn State being a playoff team and how deep they go in the playoffs this season. At some point, you would assume, and maybe it's impossible, but they're going to take away, teams are going to take away Tyler Warren. Like they have to take away Tyler Warren. So Penn State, Drew Aller is a phenomenal talent, but at some point you do need your guys to make big plays, as Penn State's receivers have done, just not, one game it's Harrison Wallace, West Virginia. One game it's Amari Evans. One game it's Liam Clifford. One game it's Julian Fleming with tough catches on two fourth downs on a game-tying drive at USC. But I think them continuing to show that they are weapons is really important for Penn State's offense, an offense that has been really good. The other thing is I think the bye week was huge for Nicholas Singleton. I don't think he was 100% still at USC. And I think his ability to be explosive in the run game, and when he's at 100%, his ability in the pass game is really important for Penn State. And I think Kaytron Allen's a very good running back. But when Nicholas Singleton is on the field and at 100%, as a defense, you have to identify him. And in the USC game, they weren't always pointing, where's Nicholas Singleton? It was, where's Tyler Warren? Where's Tyler Warren? Well, when you have Nicholas Singleton and Tyler Warren on the field, you can't defend both. And then that will then open up more for those wide receivers. Quickly on Wisconsin, 3 straight wins by a combined score of 117-16 against the opponents that were combined 2-10 in the conference. So yeah, they're playing their best football and they're beating teams handily that they're supposed to. 736 rushing yards, 417 for Tyree Walker during that stretch. Opposing quarterbacks, 42%, 302 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception during that streak. If Wisconsin's going to win this game, they're going to run the ball the way teams have run the ball well. USC ran the ball well against Penn State.
Very well.
Wisconsin, though, that game against Northwestern was a blowout. They did not play well. They played well in the 2 games prior to that. They did not play well against Northwestern. Interesting. Wisconsin's playing good. They beat teams that aren't very good. It's a really intriguing game.
The thing for Wisconsin, too, that USC did not do, I don't think the Badgers would get away from the run. I thought Lincoln Riley times in the second half got away from the run too quickly. Badgers will definitely not do that. So to your point, if Penn State can't plug up their run fits early and are struggling again to stop the running game, I think you'll see Wisconsin hammer that, play ball control, keep it away from the offense, and run it on their terms.
Yeah, and it's not the same Wisconsin run game of two tight ends, I formation. It's more, it's quote unquote an air raid style offense, but it's still a run based air raid style where they more go based on what the looks the defense are giving them. So just because they are still going to run the ball, it's going to be a different look to the running game. And then you're also going to hear commentators, analysts talk about air raid. Well, they're not a true air raid in that their air raid is based upon a run or pass option.
I would make this comp. I'm curious if you agree. Isn't it very similar to USC? Like USC is essentially an air raid team, but they ran the ball from the shotgun a lot when the looks are there.
And Miller Moss got the ball out fast against Penn State. Braden Locke likes to get the ball out fast. When he doesn't, he really struggles.
So that's going to be absolutely right about that. Something to watch for sure. But very similar offensively. Penn State, will get challenged defensively compared to what they saw 2 weeks ago. Finally, Trip, a nice little rivalry in the state of Michigan. Michigan State coming off that upset win over Iowa, going to Ann Arbor, taking on Michigan. The Wolverines right now coming limping. 2 losses in a row. 3.5-point favorites. The Wolverines are. This game kicks off 7:30 Eastern on Big Ten Network. Can Michigan State reclaim this rivalry, or the Wolverines here, are they getting back on the right track?
With the injuries in Michigan's secondary and Nick Marsh healthy, I like Michigan State. I think they have enough weapons in the passing game for Aiden Childs. I know they're on the road. I like Michigan State this week.
So do I. I love the fact that they held Caleb Johnson in check. And this is also, by the way, credit how good Caleb Johnson is. 98 yards on the season in check. But that's what Michigan State's defense did to him last week. And Sparty's, look, Aiden Childs is a dynamic player, right? Can run the ball, can throw the ball, had a really good passing game. But Michigan State also ran for 212 yards as a team last week. We've seen Michigan's defense struggle. I think Sparty, I'm with you. I think they get them. I think they win here. Go into the big house and win. Should be a really fun and exciting game. Well, that'll do it for this edition of Still Enrolled, a Big Ten podcast. Make sure you subscribe and make sure you're telling your friends about it wherever you do consume media, on YouTube, wherever you get your pods. We are there. Enjoy a big week number 9 in college football, especially in the Big Ten. And we'll talk to you on Monday to wrap it all up right here on the Still Enrolled podcast.